Hey guys, Hidden Truths here. Welcome to this new video with a bunch of new stories. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers and I think we can do it with your help. So please subscribe. It would honestly mean a lot to me. Now, let's get right into the stories. There are sounds you carry inside you long after they've stopped vibrating in the air. For me, it's a tone. Barely audible, too low to name, more sensation than sound. Like pressure on the back of the eyes. It follows me down subway tunnels, hums beneath conversation, curls under the silence between thoughts. Most people would call it tinnitus. I know better. The first time I heard it again was Platform 6 at Delancey Station. A Tuesday. Rain slicked the concrete, the city pressing in with its usual weight of movement and grit. I'd just finished a mix for a documentary on invasive species, oddly meditative, full of coastal wind and underwater static, and I was thinking about kelp forests when it hit. A vibration that settled in my chest like grief. No one else noticed. I looked around, half expecting to see some malfunctioning speaker or loose conduit buzzing in time with my guilt. But the platform was clean. Still. Then I turned and saw her. Iris. 10 years vanished, and there she stood. Shorter hair, heavier in the shoulders, her jaw still carrying that quiet defiance like a signature. She was holding a small notepad, the pages fluttering slightly from the train's approach. Her fingers moved before her eyes did. Swift, practiced signs, though she wasn't speaking to anyone. Maybe not even to herself. She didn't see me at first, but I couldn't move. I hadn't seen her since the accident. Since the fire in the venue, the collapsed sound rig, the moment my design failed and took her hearing with it. She never returned my calls. Never replied to the letters. I assumed she left the city, maybe changed her name. I never imagined she would come back, let alone show up in my life like a closing note I hadn't realized still echoed. She looked up. Her eyes met mine. No shock, no recoil. Just recognition. And something else. Not forgiveness, not warmth, something cooler. Curious, maybe, like she had been waiting to see how I'd react. She walked straight to me. No hesitation, no flourish. Held up her notepad. I've been working on something. I think you'll want to be part of it. That was all. The train hissed to a stop behind her. People flooded forward, but I couldn't hear them. The tone had returned. Louder this time, and Iris was smiling. The studio she rented was tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a locksmith, all three buildings leaning into one another like drunk old friends. Inside, it smelled like metal and resin. The floor was concrete, the walls raw brick. She had sculptures everywhere, half-finished torsos, looping copper wire structures, slabs of carved gypsum that looked like the surfaces of distant planets. She handed me a note when I arrived. They're not meant to be seen. Not entirely. They're meant to be felt. Then she guided me to a platform and asked me to step barefoot onto it. As I did, she activated something, an inaudible signal, a low-frequency pulse that trembled up through my arches and calves, into the bones of my legs. The sculpture in front of me seemed to change shape as I watched, the sensation triggering some synesthetic loop in my brain. I looked at her. She signed slowly. "Do you feel it?" I nodded. And for the first time in a decade, I didn't want to run. I wanted to build something with her. Iris never brought up the accident. Not directly. Not even when we were alone in the studio late into the evening, sweat cooling on our backs from moving a 6-foot sculpture across the floor. Instead, she let silence say what words couldn't or wouldn't. And I filled the gaps. I talked more in those first weeks than I had in years, about resonance chambers, about how low-end frequencies behave in crowded rooms, about the work I was doing on a sensory therapy interface for children with auditory processing disorders. I even showed her my field recorder, the one I used to capture ambient noise, and let her hold it against her chest to feel the tremor of streetcars rolling overhead. She smiled at that, but it was a sad smile. I wanted her to see that I'd changed. The sculptures were unlike anything I'd worked with before. Each one had its own subsonic identity, a voice that couldn't be heard, only experienced. One hummed like cathedral breath. Another throbbed in and out like a wounded heartbeat. Each frequency hit differently depending on where you stood, how much pressure you placed on the floor. The effect was intimate, unnerving, but it worked. She called it the Felt Archive, a show built around the premise that memory isn't visual or audible, but physical. That everything we try to forget still lives in the muscle. We spent hours tuning the plates beneath the platforms, using bone conductors and pressure points mapped from dancers' feet. It became a language of touch, of vibration, of response. I'd watch her fingers pause mid-sketch to catch a pulse in the floor. Sometimes I thought she could hear more now than she ever did before. Sometimes I envied her. Then came the glitches. It started with the hallway light in her studio flickering whenever we activated Platform 3. Then a warble, barely noticeable, in my left monitor channel when I brought her samples back to my home rig. A low interference, rhythmic but uneven, like Morse code played underwater. I checked the hardware, then the software, then the room. Everything looked fine. Still, I began sleeping with earplugs again. The phantom tone from the subway had returned, not always loud, but always there. I tried to ignore it, but it followed me, even into dreams. One night I woke to find I'd scratched my arm raw in my sleep. Iris noticed the marks the next day. She didn't ask, just pressed a note into my hand. Some echoes don't fade. They only shift form. I didn't know if she was referring to the audio anomalies or me. Maybe both. I started hearing them during playback. Buried pulses, nearly below the threshold of perception. Low-frequency swells that weren't part of any recording session. I scrubbed the files, ran spectral analysis, even re-imported raw field audio. But the tone was still there. Deep, persuasive, like it wanted to be heard. Worse, it wasn't just in Iris's material. I found it embedded in older projects, too. Tracks I'd mixed 6 months ago. Ones I hadn't touched since. I played them back in different studios, different headphones. The signature was always the same. I wasn't imagining it. It was real. So I brought it to Callum. He was in our shared office downtown, hunched over the latest VR spatial audio render, coffee in one hand, that familiar smirk tightening the corners of his mouth. He listened to the file through high-end cans, then leaned back. "You're overthinking it," he said. "Probably electrical interference. City's full of it." I asked if he'd been adjusting any of the equipment, patching something through the signal chains without telling me. He laughed it off. "I'm not the paranoid one, remember?" I wanted to believe him, but later that night I found a time-stamped metadata tag in one of my project folders. User, Callum. Edit, Signal Embed. Time, 03:12 a.m. My hands went cold. Iris had once written in a notebook, "Frequencies change behavior before they change thought." I didn't understand what she meant then. Now I did. The tone wasn't a glitch. It was a key. A low, repeating intrusion meant to shift something in me. Disrupt focus. Skew perception. Maybe more. Callum knew. He'd known all along. And whatever he'd been embedding, it had been working. I didn't confront him right away. Callum was always the more extroverted one. Brilliant in short bursts, dangerous in long ones. He was the one who had turned our small audio consultancy into a 6-figure sound design firm. The one who dazzled clients. and the one who resented how often I got the credit. For years, I'd let him carry that bitterness like a low hum beneath our partnership, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went to Iris instead. When I told her, her hands stilled mid-sketch. Then she stood and retrieved a locked drawer from under her workbench. Inside were dozens of marked-up sound waves, printouts of files I had worked on with annotations in red pencil. Iris had been logging the interference since the first time we'd worked together. "I thought it was something in me," she wrote. "But then it was always your files, always the same tone." I stared at the pages. Dozens of them, meticulously catalogued. She knew. Iris walked to her sculptural panel, one we hadn't mounted yet, and pulled aside the back. Inside, woven among the copper and resin, was a vibration emitter. But not the kind we'd installed. It was older, subtle, and branded with a model tag I recognized, one of Callum's. "It started a year ago," she explained through typed messages. "He came to one of my early installations, said he wanted to support your redemption arc. I didn't know what that meant until later." She looked at me hard. "He said you owed him everything, that you'd taken their attention, their praise, their sympathy." She took my hand, steady, firm, then turned it palm up. "He said grief made people like you magnetic, and he hated watching you get forgiven for something you never paid for." The tremor in my chest had nothing to do with sound. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She typed her answer slowly. "Because I didn't trust you. Not at first. I thought maybe you deserved it. But then I saw what it was doing to you." She paused, and I remembered what we were like before. The show was 5 days away. I wanted to shut it down, report Callum, purge every trace of him from the system. But Iris had a different plan. "We use it," she typed. "Let them feel it. Let them know what it means to vibrate without consent." I hesitated. Wasn't that the same violation Callum had committed? She shook her head. "No. This time it's truth. It's clarity." She signed something I hadn't seen before, then scribbled the meaning beside it. "The wound hums louder when it's named." And I understood. This wasn't revenge, this was reclamation. Opening night arrived cloaked in soft rain. The gallery hummed with low chatter, umbrellas dripping in the vestibule, strangers wrapped in scarves of cashmere and curiosity. Inside, the lights were dimmed, the space cavernous. Iris had arranged the sculptures so visitors would have to move slowly, deliberately, tracing shapes with hands and souls, not eyes. We'd hidden the new frequencies carefully, layered under the old architecture of her work. Not everyone would feel them, but those who did wouldn't forget. Callum was there, of course he was, smiling wide, shaking hands with curators, taking credit with practiced modesty. He hadn't spoken to me since I'd changed the admin passwords on our shared cloud. He walked toward me, arms open. "I knew you'd pull through, brother, always do." I didn't answer, because the tone had already begun. Iris started the piece herself. Stepping onto platform 1, barefoot in her black linen dress, her fingers trembling just slightly. The first hum rose through the concrete like breath through ribs. Then another, and another. Each platform had a different vibration, a story in frequency, a memory rendered tactile. Grief, forgiveness, pressure, disorientation, shame. When the crowd moved among them, they didn't talk. They closed their eyes. They placed hands on hips and walls and strangers' shoulders. They listened through their bones. Halfway through the sequence, Platform 4 activated. Callum flinched. It wasn't visible to everyone, just a twitch in his jaw, a stiffening of the neck. But I saw it. I knew that frequency. I'd tuned it to the exact pitch used in our earliest studio prototype, the one that distorted reaction time, and induced mild panic in test subjects. I'd buried it at 57 dB, barely enough to register. But it found him. His smile faded, his brow furrowed. He moved quickly to the exit. I never followed. At the end of the night, Iris and I stood together by the last sculpture. No one else remained. The floor was wet with footprints. The air hummed faintly, even after we shut down the plates. She wrote one last note and folded it into my hand. "You don't owe me anything now. You never did." I didn't know what to say. The silence between us was full, but not heavy. She touched the base of the sculpture just once and stepped away. I stayed behind. It was strange, feeling both vindicated and hollow, like I'd been waiting to be punished for so long I didn't know what to do without the sentence hanging over me. That night, I dreamed of her laughter. Before the accident, before the fire, when her voice was still a sound I could record, I woke up with tears on my face. I never saw her again, but every time I stand near a speaker and feel the air shift, every time silence thickens just before a storm, I flinch. Maybe because I know she didn't just forgive me, she rebuilt me, and then she let me go.